Welcome to Reddit Aliens. Serious. Have you ever had an unexplained or paranormal experience? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I imagine lots of people have stories but are afraid to share because others will think they are crazy or lying. Serious posts only. Nobody here will judge you. Did you see a ghost, a strange animal in the forest, a weird light in the sky? Feel free to get it off your chest and we can speculate together. I know I have a story that still shakes me up to this day. My dad had this habit of knocking his fingers on the wall in our hallway as he walked by, and he had a crackly toe. Together it made a very distinctive sound, bada-bada-bap, followed by a pop. We always knew where we were in trouble by the tempo of that sound. My older brother had a kid a few years after Dad died, and one night, while I'm babysitting and the kid's upstairs in her crib, she's about 18 months, over the monitor, I can tell she's not napping anymore, but she seems to be occupying herself. Then I hear bada-bada-bap, pop, and she giggles. It took me a minute to recognize that sound, but when I did, I went upstairs. The door to her room had been closed when I put her down, but now it's open, and she's standing in her crib, looking at the far corner. There was nothing there. This is pretty freaky. I still don't know how to explain it. About 2 years ago, my sister, her infant nephew, and I moved into an apartment that, we later discovered, was used as an elderly community. From the moment we moved in, we felt uneasy. The weird feeling wasn't enough to get us to ditch our seemingly awesome apartment though, especially not a cheap 2-bedroom that allowed dogs and had a pool. A few months after moving in, weird stuff started happening. Shadows moving in an otherwise still room, objects not being where they had been left, baby toys talking to themselves in dark rooms, just the kind of thing to make your skin crawl. To make matters worse, even when it was bloody hot outside, my bedroom would be freezing and the closet door was always broken in an open position. It didn't matter how often we would get it fixed, it would instantly be broken again. Now, this is where it gets a little crazy. One morning, I woke and my bed had been moved. I hadn't even as much as wrinkled my sheets while sleeping, yet my bed had been slid 3 feet away from the wall. I then began having pretty intense night terrors. I'd jump out of bed screaming and throwing my blankets begging for my sister to save me. This would happen 3 times a night. One night, I had a particularly vivid night terror, only I didn't feel frightened. I jumped up in bed, looked around, and saw eyes peering around my broken closet door. I leaned in and saw a man, mid-20s, staring back at me. I said in the calmest voice I could muster, "I'm going to give you a few minutes alone, but then you need to leave." I stumbled to the living room and sat on the couch for 10 minutes, then walked back to my bed. From that moment on, no more baby toys talked, my closet door closed with ease, and my bedroom was normal temperature. This may sound weird, and to this day I still have no explanation as to how this happened. I live in a 36-story apartment building and was on my way to go out to the mall. We live on the 30th floor. I get in the lift at floor 30 and press the ground button, floor G. When the lift opens at ground, I notice the whole foyer lobby area is completely different. Different couches, lights, colors, etc. I was really taken back by it. I make my way to the exit after seeing the outside area and then looking back to the building entrance. I realize that the building isn't the one I live in. This building was in the same local area, not too far away from mine, but I have no explanation as to how or when I got there. This all happened while I was in the lift. I'm the kind of guy who is very skeptic and down to earth, but this still gets me. Weird. Has anything like this ever happened to you? It's happened to me, but not this much. Not paranormal, but I guess this falls under the unexplained category. Anyway, in the same day, I was recognized by at least 5 different store clerks and people on the street, none of whom I had ever met before. I was just grocery shopping, running errands, etc. First place I went was to the corner store to pick up a snack. I walk in and the clerk says, "Hey, you're back so soon." Never seen had ever been to that corner store, so I told him. He claimed that I had come in earlier that day. Next place I went to was the same deal. An employee who was stocking things at the grocery store said he had rung me up an hour or so before. Then the cashier greeted me with "Welcome back" when I was checking out. At the phone store, I was asked if my phone was still giving me problems, because apparently I had come in half an hour ago complaining about problems with receiving text messages. The employee claimed we even had the same phone. As I walked out, a jogger ran past me and proclaimed, "Hey man, funny running into you again," didn't stop him as I was a little confused. That night, while I was waiting for the bus, a woman approached me and just struck up conversation as if we were old friends before realizing I wasn't who she thought I was. After reading this, I realized how mundane it must sound. It doesn't. But that was easily one of the weirdest days I've ever experienced. Maybe I was part of the most elaborate and subtle prank in history. My story is not freaky or scary, but definitely unexplainable. It has to do with my identical twin brother. He was living with my dad in the DC area, and I was living on the other side of the country. About 1 a.m., I had the most vivid dream where I was freezing cold and looking up at the stars, and something was very wrong. I somehow knew it was my brother. The dream shook me so much, I was wide awake, scared. Oh well, just a dream. I'll watch some TV to calm down and go back to sleep. The next morning, I see that my dad is calling me. So when I answer, I say, "Dad, before you say anything, I know something happened with my brother." He told me that my brother ate a bottle of Ativan and washed it down with a fifth of vodka. They found him in his underwear on the hood of his car looking upwards. Remember, in my dream, I was freezing and looking up at the stars. Luckily, they found him in time to save his life, which he eventually took years later, but there's no way to explain the dream and the connection I felt with him that night. When I was younger, I lived with my grandma. Her house was, to say the least, effing spooky. We would hear noises at all hours of the night, and not just the house creaking kind of noises, more like people talking in hushed voices in odd rooms in the house. We heard dogs barking in our basement. We didn't have dogs at the time, but the one story I have is I went to the bathroom late at night, and the bathroom mirror faced our dining area. So walking into the bathroom, of course, I'd look into the mirror, and looking into it, I saw someone standing at our dining room table. Old clothes, long white hair, a very dressy type suit. I turned around to look and didn't see anything. Needless to say, I slept in the bathroom because F that shit. Mine's kind of long, and I think it may fall under the unexplained more than necessarily paranormal, but here it is. When I was 13 or 14, I lived in Hawaii on a military base along the side of a volcanic crater, AMR for those who know the area. The townhomes we lived in were up along the slope of the mountain, but the last 500 feet or so were empty hill space, leading to a cliff overlooking the crater, which had businesses and such in it, long dormant. Well, anyway, my friend and I, being the young teenagers we were, loved hiking the side of the crater and walking along the edge. It was mostly flat leading up to the edge, and there was a fence along most of it, so this isn't as unsafe as it sounds. We found an abandoned bunker, most likely from World War II, about a mile along the side of the hill, and decided to go exploring. We got inside, and it was mostly empty. There was a mount for what I would assume would have been a machine gun at some point, and there was a locked metal door. It was pretty rusty and sounded kind of hollow, like there were a few spots you could probably see through, except for the fact that it was pitch black inside. We go to this bunker and kind of hang out and play all the time, until the last time we went. We got there around 5 p.m., and we were sitting around talking about random things, probably Animal Crossing or Phantasy Star Online at the time. All of a sudden, we started hearing the faint banging noise coming from behind the door. We froze and got super silent, and the banging was rhythmically speeding up. Like at first, it would be a slight bang every 15 seconds or so. Then after about 20 faint bangs, they would be like 10 seconds apart, etc. It got to the point where they were about 5 seconds apart, and then they stopped altogether. We looked at the door and noticed some of the rust powder, I don't know, WTF it's called, like crumbled rusty door, fall off the door. We got up to nope the F out of there, started climbing the ladder out, and the person that last left, there 3 of us, and I was second. So the person climbing behind me swears they heard a loud bang against the door as he finished climbing out. We ran down the hill, and some MPs spotted us and told us we weren't allowed to be up there. And about 2 weeks later, they had built a fence and sectioned off the entire area. Still no effing clue what was down there, if anything. This wasn't me, but my ex, and it still weirds me out when I think about it. It's not particularly long or weird, but here's what happened. One day, he went for a bike ride, rode around town, came home, the end. This is where it gets weird. Seemingly to him, he arrived home the same day, some 2 hours later, like a normal ride. His family freaked when he walked inside though. He had been missing for 2 days. No one could find him. They even started to get the police involved. He literally thought he just went for a bike ride and came home. The end. He still has no idea what happened. I think alien abduction. So does he. But no one will ever know. Perhaps this is just a case of a ghost with impeccable taste in music. When I was in high school, I always used to listen to my Discman before I went to bed each night. One night, I was listening to Weezer's Blue album, Nice. The album was store-bought, not burned. I was getting nice and relaxed listening to Oli and Dreams when all of a sudden the music cut off and it was just loud static. It was obviously very jarring, so I opened my eyes and sat up. In the corner of my dark room across the way and above the door, there was a white fuzzy orbish type thing just floating there. I couldn't make out much of a shape, but definitely could point to the head and two dark holes that would be eyes. I looked at it for a few seconds, then immediately dived across the room to turn a light on, and it was gone. I had one of those atomic clocks as an alarm that I never had to set since I got it 2 years prior. It was just displaying 8888, not flashing, just the numbers. It never set again, and I had to throw it away. Eerie night. Good music though. I have two. First one is about what I want to believe was a UFO sighting. I was out watching the stars and saw a light looking like the ones you see on airplanes, but this one was moving in a square. It was too dark to see what vehicle the light was attached to, but the light was moving in the same location for a while. Then I saw how the vehicle started moving away. The sudden speed increase made me think it wasn't an airplane, perhaps a helicopter. But if that was the case, it must have had a rather large square platform beneath it with a rail or beam for the light to follow. My second one isn't as mysterious. I can't explain except for me being extremely lucky. I fell from a third-floor balcony face first onto a gravel path. No bruises, scratches, or injuries at all. Not even scuff marks on hands or knees. Well, I used to live in Arizona, near a mountain sacred to the Native American tribes in the area, Pima and Maricopa. There were a lot of skinwalker rumors in the area. My friend and I loved camping, then were lucky enough to get permission to use a site near the mountain, along the Salt River for a weekend. First thing you have to understand is that we were a pretty sheltered group of kids, didn't use drugs and alcohol in moderation. We mostly went out to share creepy stories around the campfire and nerd out for a night or two. We all spent a lot of time in the desert, and were all familiar with the land and wildlife, even the rare species. We were sitting around our fire, listening to the river and the animal sounds around us. Crickets, cicadas, birds. The moon was almost full, and the desert was beautiful. Suddenly, everything goes quiet. Just the sound of the river remains, and even that seems spooky. The air grew still and seemed to get cold. We hear rustling in the undergrowth across from our fire. Our steps, a javelina. Javelinas are a pig family, usually a brownish color. Biggest ones are about the size of a medium-sized dog. They're actually kinda cute. This one wasn't. It was huge and looked jet black with glowing red eyes. It paced around a bit, seemed like it was moving around the fire so it could look each one of us in the eye. I've never seen anything look at me like that, and I work with psych patients. Its gaze was cold and searching, like it could see through me. After what felt like forever, it finally backed up through the undergrowth. The night got warmer, and the normal sounds started up again. We spent the rest of the night very close to the fires, and GTFO'd as soon as the sun rose. I really want to believe it was just a male javelina scoping out some territory, but every instinct I have says it wasn't. Would you be as comfortable living in a place with someone like Philip? I'm too late to the party, but F it. I live in a haunted house. I don't mean haunted like Amityville Horror or something, but our house is almost 100 years old and we have a ghost. Our first clue was shortly after we moved in, when some money I had laid on my bedside table went missing. Significant other didn't take it, dogs didn't eat it, it hadn't fallen under or behind, it was just gone. I found it several months later when unpacking a box from our apartment. The box was still sealed with packing tape, and the money was in the middle of the pile of papers and shit in the box. I know it was the same money because of the order of the bills and the way it was folded, neither of which was usual for me. A coworker had paid me back for something and done it that way. Second incident was the ceiling fan reversing, straight up stopped and started turning the other way while I was watching. Not like slowed down either, but stopped dead. Then I saw the ghost one night. My SO swears I was dreaming, but I knew I wasn't. He was hanging a hat on a coat stand in the hallway where we don't have one, and he looked right at me. I could see him clearly. He seemed to sort of glow or be illuminated from a light somewhere nearby, and could describe him to this day, down to the fashions he wore, his mustache, his tired but kind eyes. Somehow I also knew his name, Philip. Since then, he sometimes makes mischief. My dogs seem to see him, and he occasionally has fun playing with their ball, even in the backyard. He makes winds, plays with the fan, has footsteps. If he's annoying or frightening us, we just say firmly, "Philip, stop," and he does. I don't mind him. I sort of like him, actually. I've looked for records about him, but as best as I can piece together, he rented a room here during the Depression, so there's really nothing with a paper trail. Anyway, that's my best true paranormal story. Growing up, my great-grandmother's dad's side was my best friend. I spent many of my days curled up in her lap watching The Price is Right and her soaps while she gently stroked the back of my head and called out answers or yell at the characters on her shows. She was one of the coolest women I've ever known. She was diagnosed with cancer when I was about 12 or so, and within a month she was gone. The hardest part about it was that I was living with my mother at the time and didn't even know she was sick until my dad called to ask if I'd go with him to her funeral. For so long I was angry at my dad and his family for not telling me sooner and giving me a chance to say my goodbyes. One afternoon in my early 20s, while standing in my backyard getting things ready for a New Year's Eve concert party my SO and his band were throwing, I was talking to a friend. I don't remember how we got to talking about my great-grandmother and how I was still having a hard time with letting go of the anger and resentment I felt. I was telling her how much I wished I'd had a chance to tell her I loved her one more time. I knew she already knew it, but I still wanted to say it. I was overcome with more sadness than I usually felt when I thought about her, and was trying really hard to not break down and cry. All of a sudden, I felt a warm, firm hand make one gentle stroke down the back of my head, just like she used to do when I was small. My heart stopped, and I whipped around to see nothing. However, in that same moment, my sadness was replaced with a sense of peace. I can't explain it, and I don't go looking for an explanation. I don't expect people to believe me when I tell them about it. None of that really matters to me in this instance. The feeling that rushed through my body in those few seconds, and the emotions that came and those that left, felt like I was being told everything was already known, and to not be sad anymore. It felt like closure.